Hello there. This is Mark Roberts, and you are listening to the Daily Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I appreciate you tuning in to listen. And really just want to say thank you to everybody who has listened. We've gotten a ton of donations. We've gotten a lot of nice comments, several really nice emails. Some people have gone and rated and reviewed the podcast. In fact, as of this morning, we were in the top 50 in the sports category for podcasts, which is, above my wildest dreams. So thank you for going on iTunes and rating and review the podcast. If you haven't done that yet and you get a chance, please just go subscribe, rate and review the podcast. It just takes a couple of minutes. I know it's kind of a pain, but it helps us out a lot. We're hoping that with where we're ranked, we can eventually get a sponsor, and that will make life a little easier for me and for Kyle. As a programming note, Kyle is sick tonight. If you can hear it in my voice, I am still sick, but I'm going to try to push through. Mine's just a throat issue, so if I sound funny, I apologize for that. But Kyle is not feeling up to coming on the podcast. Hopefully he'll be back soon. But today I have a special treat for all of you listeners. I am joined by the Dean of Fantasy Basketball, Josh Lloyd. Josh, how's it hanging?
Mark, it's hanging okay. I'm not sure about the title of the Dean, but I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be hanging for everyone listening and watching.
What title do you feel like would be appropriate? Like the czar of fantasy basketball?
No, I want to go with Prince.
Prince. You've pretty much taken over the fantasy basketball world.
I don't think that's true, Mark, because you and Kyle's new podcast, you mentioned that you jumped into the top 50 on the iTunes chart. I checked the Australian iTunes chart and you're at number 14. So you're dominating not only there, but abroad as well.
Yeah, well, we do have a strong Australian contingent, and I think that's a lot due to your exposure. So we appreciate that, Josh.
Not a problem.
No, Josh, I'm sure that anybody who's listening to our podcast knows you well, but just in case there's somebody who happens to listen to our podcast that hasn't heard of you before, why don't you tell them all the sites that you now run and take over, you've taken over, and where they can find you?
Okay, well, I don't take over. I don't run lots of places.
That kind of sounded bad, but you contribute in a lot of different places, and you're sort of like the muscle of a lot of different sites that are.
I do. Fantasy. So I do a lot of stuff at Basketball Monster. That's the main site that I'm working at, producing their content over there, projections over there, all that sort of stuff. So I'm the fantasy analyst over at Basketball Monster, which you may have heard of. I also provide fantasy content and NBA content on hardwoodparoxysm.com. I have my own site, redrockbasketball.com. as well, and RotoWire as well. I write for those guys as well. So they're where I am. Plus there is the podcast that I host as well, Mark, which you've been on numerous times, the Red Rock Fantasy Basketball Podcast, which I do daily, much like yourself.
Yeah, great, Josh. So go check it. Basically, if you type fantasy basketball into Google and click anywhere, it'll take you to Josh's page somehow. All right.
If only it was that simple.
We have some good stuff planned for today, Josh. Kyle and I actually have some. We were really excited about the stuff that we have planned for the rest of the week, and maybe even into next week. We want to kind of save some of that stuff for when Kyle can be on the podcast. Hopefully, he gets better soon. But just for tonight, we want to do is, hopefully this feels like a thank you, but maybe as a thank you, we want to just take some of the questions that have flooded in. I haven't been able to get to either my email or in Twitter and answer those. And hopefully, Josh, we talked about this before the podcast started. Hopefully we can do it in a way that is sort of interesting to everybody. Before we get there, though, the projections and rankings on our site, the Daily Fantasy Basketball Podcast.com, have been updated. Several of you have asked about that. When's the next update going to be? You noticed J.R. Smith was not in our rankings. He's there now. We've changed some things. The number one guy I wanted to talk about to you, though, Josh, is Zach LaVine. You made me aware of this, and it was kind of surprising to me. Zach LaVine was named
me as well.
Yeah, he was named the starter in Minnesota. It was pretty interesting news. I think we all kind of had Kevin Martin penciled in as the starter there. So I've gone in and I've changed his projection in our database. I'm wondering what your take is on Zach LaVine, though.
The most interesting thing to me about him being named the starter is that it finally confirmed, I think, what I knew and what you knew is that the Timberwolves view him as a shooting guard. So there's a lot of talk in the offseason now. Rubio's going to get traded. Levine's going to be the starting point guard. That was never going to happen. Levine's not a point guard. Yeah, he played point guard last year, but he was playing point guard because it was him and it was Lorenzo Brown, and there was nobody else in that backcourt. So he had to play point guard. He is not a point guard. He's a scoring guard. He can handle the ball and he can distribute the ball, and that's going to be some of his value, for this season and for next season. But he's not a pure point guard. As an aside, people are very, very down on Ricky Rubio, which I don't know if you are, but I think that he's going to be a significant bargain this year in fantasy leagues. People are very, very down on him.
I'm glad that you brought him up. I don't know where we are, in comparison to some people, everybody else. But what I am interested in, you kind of brought it up already. So Zach LaVine played a lot of point guard last year, and he had a lot of fantasy value in part because of his assists.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you think the shift over to shooting guard, or as even just playing with Rubio, how do you think that affects the fantasy value that he has or that he showed us last year?
I think that he's not going to be able to get that same value that he had last year. Even if he is playing starters minutes, he's not going to be playing 40 minutes. But even if he plays 30, and that's the thing, we don't know. He's a starter, but what sort of starter is he going to be? Is he going to be a split time starter? Is he going to be 27 minutes? Is he going to be Andrew Wiggins, 36 minutes? We don't know what sort of minutes he's going to get at this stage. All we know is that at this point, he is going to be starting the game on the court and not on the bench. We've seen Keith Bogans be a starter before. We've seen Johnny O'Brien be starters before. It doesn't mean anything, that designation. You don't think that's going to be the situation with LaVine, but we just don't know. Him and Kevin Martin going to play 26 minutes each, 25 minutes each, 28 and 20. Like, we don't know how it's going to break out. So that's another part of it. And I do think that
What's your guess? Do you have a guess for us? Because I actually think usually, and you know this, I'm pretty conservative when I hear somebody new is named a starter. I usually start them at 27 or 28 minutes. I actually think in Minnesota's system, I feel like this is sort of a cultural shift. They're going young, and I've got him at like 31 minutes, which is, pretty aggressive, I would say, for my rankings. What's your feeling on that as far as, I know it's just a guess at this point, but what's your sort of initial guess with him?
I've got him at 29, which I thought was even me being a little bit aggressive, because 27 would be the starting point that I would go for in those. 27 is always a good spot to go for when it's a timeshare. We don't really know what's going to happen. Or one guy might get 27, the other guy gets 23 or so. So I went 29 thinking, they are going to play him there. And they will play him a little bit at point guard when Rubio's off the court. It won't be, because they're not going to rely solely on Andre Miller and Tyus Jones to have those backup minutes. Tyus Jones, I think, is going to be good. And I think at some point Tyus Jones will get significant backup minutes at point guard. But I think that LaVine will play. He might play 5 minutes a night handling as the primary ball handler. I don't think he'll play a big chunk of it. So I think 29 is where I went. I could easily see him getting 30 to 31. But again, we don't know. Kevin Martin is too good not to get minutes. He has to get some minutes. He is a.
I think he's a good chance. Don't you think
he gets traded? Yeah, that's true. There's a big chance. There's a huge chance that he gets traded. And if that's the case, then obviously LaVine's value goes up significantly.
Yeah. One note that I had from NBA Wowie, which is, subject to small sample size, and I brought this up on Twitter, though. LaVine's assist rate last season with Rubio off the floor, which was the vast majority of his minutes, was at 25%. That means 25% of his teammates' baskets were assisted by LaVine. So if they made 4 baskets when he was on the court, LaVine had an assist on one of them. In the few minutes that he played with Rubio, it was all the way down at 10%. Now, I realize that's a small sample size, but I think it gives us a little bit of evidence for what we suspect, that he's just not going to have the same assist rate with Rubio on the court. And so we did adjust that down in our projections. Just for anybody that's watching this, if you want to see our new rankings, if you go to our webpage, you can see I have it up here on the screen. If you go to I'm showing the head-to-head rankings. If I click on them here, hopefully everything's working. You can scroll down, and I will show you where we've got Zach LaVine at. And there he is, number 95 right there, worth $8 in a auction draft. Got him for 31.5 minutes, 13.6 points, 3.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, almost a steal, and a 3-pointer per game. So if that's the type of production that you're interested in, he certainly does have value. I think given his upside, Josh, he's somebody that should not go undrafted. He's not sort of the usual guy that's hanging in the the hundreds range. He's a guy in the hundreds range or right above, pick 100 in our rankings that could, we don't know. I mean, maybe he's not good, but also maybe there's a chance he creeps up to the top 75 or even the top 50.
Yeah, there is that chance. There's no way he should be undrafted at this point. And if he's on any waiver wire in a league that already has drafted, you need to rectify that immediately. He's been snapped up in all of my leagues pretty quickly. You can put a significant, if you've got like a fab budget, you can put a pretty, $5 or so on him, $6, $7. I would put a significant chunk. I stupidly put $2 on him in one of my leagues and got pipped by someone else getting $2 and having the priority over me. So I ended up missing out on Levine. But yeah,
how did they decide the priority? I mean, how would you break that?
I have no idea how it was decided. For some reason, I had the last priority. I don't know how it was decided. It was sort of preset in the league. No concept of all how it happened. I'm just disappointed that I missed out on getting him. But you're right. Look, he should not be undrafted at this point. He's clearly he's got upside and he's got value even if he doesn't have upside.
Agreed. Exactly. I think that's a perfect way to say it. All right, enough about Levine. One other guy I want to talk about that I was taking a look at them projections, and I mostly bring him up because our friend RotoWire and a few other places, JJ Cali continues to harp on me that Dwight Powell is a player that I need to be aware of and take into account in my projections. And I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like in the back of my head, I remember you also being a Dwight Powell guy. Is that true?
Yes, I think, and the main reason I'm big on Powell is
give me the case for Dwight Powell. Tell me why I should care about him.
I discussed this on the Mavericks podcast the other night that I did, that if something happens to Dirk, we know he has had some injury problems, especially with his knees, and he's another year older, that who is their backup power forward behind Dirk?
Is it Powell? You have to tell me.
It has to, unless they're going with Charlie Villanueva out there, which they may.
That's probably the person I would have guessed.
But you think Powell, but the way Powell plays, I'm not comparing him to Dirk, but his game is actually, it's not dissimilar to Dirk. He's not a low post banging sort of guy. He's a guy who can stretch the floor. He can hit threes.
Like a homeless man's Dirk Nowitzki.
Pretty much.
Worse than a poor man's, like a street.
A destitute.
Yeah.
A destitute man's Dirk Nowitzki. But in terms of fitting into the offense, he could fit in there and perform a similar role in terms of spacing, offensive sets, all that sort of stuff that what Dirk does. He's clearly not the player. We know that, but he's not an aggressive rebounder. He's not the sort of guy who's going to do the defensive things that other power forwards might in the league. But he provides sort of a facsimile of what Dirk can provide, as well as being able to get out there and space the floor, hit the threes. He's a pretty decent shooter. And I think that in that sort of scenario, if Dirk goes down, Powell will find himself becoming standard league viable for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long Dirk's out. I don't think there's any role for him in any other sort of situation. But if Dirk is out, I really think that Powell could be a surprise guy.
Very good. If Dirk is not out, are you keeping track of him maybe just in deep leagues?
Deep leagues, yes. It would have to be relatively deep. And I'm just going to have a look where I've actually got him sort of situated on my rankings, assuming that Dirk's not out. He's at like about 230. So we're talking pretty deep stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's at 20 minutes a game. But if he gets 30 minutes a game, then he might jump up to be 150, 140 sort of guy. And again, it could be a big man who comes in and hits 1.5 threes and gets 6 rebounds and has 12 or 13 points. That sort of range, I think, is probably where we can look at him having value.
All right. Well,
you're not convinced.
Homeless man's Dirk Nowitzki. I can get on board with that. I did bump him up in our rankings a little bit. Excuse me, in the projections, which bumped him up in our rankings a little bit. I think I gave him 15 or maybe 18 minutes a game.
Like what you just said there was very important. You made the distinction between rankings and projections and how they go hand in hand. And I think a lot of sites don't actually understand that. And they'll put projections out there, but then have no relevance when they do rankings to actually how the projections are. And rankings have to be based on projections. Like, you can't have projections and have rankings that are completely subjective. It doesn't make any sense at all. And I think the fact that you've just mentioned that is a real key and one of the winners to what you do on your side, that this stuff is all tied into numbers. And that's basically what fantasy basketball is. It's numbers with names attached to it.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. That's one of the things that we definitely think is important. I mean, you can definitely do subjective rankings, and in some places I get the idea of that, but it leads to a lot of bias, right? And you're going to get a lot of people. You're going to get personal opinion floating in there, and I would rather the personal opinion. Look, our rankings and projections are not void of personal opinion. But what I like about the way that we do it and what way you do it at Basketball Monster, which we've all, definitely appreciate, is my personal opinion is not whether John Wall should be the 10th best or 15th best player. My opinion is should his assists be at 9 assists per game or 10 assists per game? And I think that leads to a lot more fruitful discussion. And you can dig into that and you can look at historically what's he done, what have similar players done, and you can kind of sort of find an answer that you're comfortable with. If you're just sort of slotting them in at rankings, it just feels like you're not taking into account everything that all the stats that encompass that player.
If you're doing ranking subjectively as well, basically you're saying I should be drafting players based on this because this guy is better than this guy, who's better than this guy, and who's better than this guy. And I've said this plenty of times. I think I discussed it when I spoke with you and Kyle on my podcast the other day. It's not about grabbing the next highest guy off your list. Yeah. It's about grabbing the next guy who fits what you need to do based on then who you think you'll be able to get the other picks later on. It's about building the best team, not getting the best players. And there is a massive distinction between that, and it doesn't always come across clearly. It is not about grabbing the best players. It is about grabbing the best fit and building the best team. And that is not to do with a list of, I think John Wall is a better player than Eric Bledsoe, or I think John Wall is a better player than DeMarcus Cousins, or whoever it is. It's about, even that's not a great example because we're talking first-round guys, but even talking mid-round guys.
Josh, you're doing a great job of teeing me up for what I want to go into next. Can I just
go ahead
and then let you go in here? No, this is perfect. So I told you I want to go through some of the emails we've gotten, and we got an email about this exact subject from Brendan Casey. Thanks for emailing, Brendan. Yeah, thanks for sending it. And he's done a lot of prep work, and he's a fellow Australian, so maybe you can say something Australian to him, Josh.
Something Australian. Thanks for the ripper email, Brendan. I'm sure it's a beauty.
There you go. Perfect. Thank you. That was corny. I'm sorry. So he's got some players that he's thinking about taking in the first round, basically as the cornerstone of his team. He mentions, based on where he's drafted, Chris Paul, DeMarcus Cousins, Westbrook. And then he's basically saying, who do I turn around and pair with those players? Like, who would be a good match for them? So he's not looking at the rankings and just saying, I'm going to take the highest ranked player available. He's going in and saying, okay, if I get Chris Paul, who's a good match for him? If I get DeMarcus Cousins, who's a good match for him, so I can start building my team, which I think is exactly what you're saying. How do I stack players together so that the categories lead a winning strategy? And actually, this is going to be a big part of our podcast, our Draft Kit podcast. We're going to go through and kind of do this for each player when Kyle gets back. But as more of a general question, Josh, how do you figure that out? Like, how do you figure out who would be a good pairing to go with your first round pick when you're in a draft?
It's there's no exact science to it, really. There is, but there's a lot of ways to approach it, because say you can draft a guy like DeMarcus Cousins early on. You can say, okay, he doesn't get me a huge amount of assists. He doesn't get me a great free throw percentage, but they're not terrible numbers. And then you got to have a couple of ways to go. I think that you can't say I'm taking Cousins, therefore I am taking insert player here. I am taking Carmelo Anthony or whoever. You have to say I will take a couple of. I've got a couple of different options, and then dictates my next pick. But what you want to do is, I and you, Mark, we always want to look probably in a 9 category level. We want 7 or 6 pretty strong categories that we want to look at, and that depends on who we're getting with that second pick and who is going to be around there. Because most of these guys in the first round are pretty strong through most categories, and even if they've got weaknesses, they're not big weaknesses. So Steph Curry's got a weakness in blocks. All right, so his standard score comes out almost -1 for blocks, which is not too bad. But if you pair him with Rudy Gobert or Serge Ibaka in the second round, then you have negated that negative that he's got there. It's all about.
Let's put it in the context of our recommended punt strategy, which is just the 6 positive categories. And let's just say, for example, that you picked somebody in the first round that had 4 elite categories of those. Maybe I don't know even who that would be, if it's Cousins or Curry.
Curry's the only guy with really 4, and I count an elite category pretty much as a Z score of over 2. That's where I go. You're elite in that category. I think Curry's the only guy who's got 4 ones over 2.
And probably one of his is free throw percentage.
Yep.
So
it's not. No, it's not. That's why Curry, I think, actually fits into a free throw percentage punt strategy. It's points, threes, assists, and steals that he goes over 2.
Okay. So and then maybe they're bad at, or average to below average to bad at 2 other categories. In the second round, how do you approach it? Are you looking to fortify those other 2 categories? Are you looking to add to the 4 categories that you're really strong in? Like,
what I want to do is I want to look at I'm looking more at this more sort of each day as I go around, is stat scarcity. So even if I've got good points in the first round, I might want to get good points again in the second round, like get some real scoring or get some high free throw percentage, depending on the way I'm building my team, because I'm not going to be able to find that later on. There's just so few options of finding that later on. A category that I'm big on disregarding a lot this year is blocks as well, because if you don't get one of, say, about 4 guys, it's really hard to compete in that area. And that makes me okay. So there's going to be a premium on those guys. They're going to go early, and you take one of them, Rudy Gobert, you're struggling points. Drummond and Jordan, your free throws are in trouble. Serge Ibaka, he's not giving you big rebounds for a big man. Do you know what I mean? They've always got like a little negative associated with them, but to get them, you have to get blocks and you have to build other things around them. So I'm a bit out on blocks this year as a category that I'm looking for, because you have to go so early on a lot of these guys, and a lot of their value is buoyed by that huge block number, and it masks a few of their other deficiencies. But I want to grab. So for that example, like in the last couple of drafts that I've had, at the back end of the second round, I've been looking at Carmelo Anthony, because I think he's looked really good so far in preseason. I'm a little bit worried about the knee, but in terms of getting that volume scoring, you can get him and pair him with another big scorer in the first one. So I've paired him with James Harden in a couple of situations. Like, my scoring is huge, and they're not going to afford to actually get some more categorical specialists in the other areas. I can get assists in round 3 or 4. I can get some rebounds. I can get some steals. I can get my threes later on. But the free throw percentage and the points that you get from those 2 guys early on, you can't get it later on.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a great approach. So because if you punt, you've definitely got to build up all the categories. At what point do you kind of shift and say, okay, I've targeted the categories I really want to. Now I need to build up the other categories and make sure I'm going to win them as well. Like, maybe you've built up points and rebounds and 3-pointers or something. I don't know, but you know that you're deficient in steals, and you know that that's a category you need to win. When do you go ahead and start?
I think a good time.
What point in the draft do you feel like, hey, I don't need to worry about points anymore, or sorry, category scarcity, which you're talking about, and I just need to make sure my team is a complete team?
I think you need to start doing that probably around round 7, round 8, that sort of area, and really focus. Okay, where am I weak in? Like, aside from a category that I'm punting, which other category needs to be bumped up to that sort of just above average level to be? Because when you're punting categories, you normally have 4 really strong ones. You'll have 2 or 3 pretty good to not great, but pretty solid, and normally a couple of bad ones. Doesn't always work that way, but in those middle rounds, those ones that are really good, I want to then be targeting some of those categories that are sort of sitting at about average that I want to bump up to become competitive against the majority of teams. So that's when I want to start looking there. So I did a really weird draft this morning. Actually, we did the Red Rock Listener League, the non-traditional category league, where we didn't have any of the traditional category stats. So they made the draft really strange.
I think I had a couple of rankings requests for this league.
You did. I saw people saying that. We had assist to turnover, steal to turnover ratio, adjusted field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, offensive rebounds, personal fouls.
There was stuff that I felt like I couldn't even get them. Anyway,
we had a whole bunch of categories, but in that league that we did this morning, so like I looked at it, and go, my 3-point percentage is not high. I need someone who's going to shoot, a pretty decent 3-point percentage. So I was at like pick 60, and I go, I want to get Eric Gordon because he was a 40% 3-point shooter last year. My other categories, like he's not going to help me in these other categories. He's probably going to hurt me, but the bump that he's going to give me in 3-pointers, I need to go early on him. Unfortunately, someone else in the draft was thinking the same thing, so they grabbed him about 4 picks before me. But it's around that 60 to 80 range where I go, where are the weaknesses that I would need to address? I need to address them here. And I've mentioned this plenty of times before, is that once you get outside the top 50, the guys between 60 and 100, they're so close in value. Like I need to make sure that I get them on my team. I don't really care if I jump 2 rounds ahead on them. Yeah, if they're projected to pick 90 and if I grab them at 70, I don't care because these guys are so close. And Eric Gordon's 3-point percentage was giving him such a huge value, and his other numbers were down and negative, but I could easily absorb them based on what I'd done earlier. And that's the key to me, is where can you absorb deficiencies and where do you need to add to your deficiencies?
Let me ask you one more question. And this one came in and I can't find who asked it, but it goes along these lines. So we're talking, assuming that I've kind of set you up, assuming that you're good in a few categories or poor in a few categories. I think a question that a lot of people have is, how do you know if you're good in a few categories or not good in a few categories? I mean, once you get past a pick, or like everybody knows that Anthony Davis is good in blocks and rebounds, but once you start stacking him with a player or 2 players, how do you know kind of like which areas you need to be better at and which areas you feel like you've hit sufficiently? Like I'm saying areas, I should be saying categories.
How do you do it? Well, there is software that can sort of do that for you and look at it. But basically, you need to have an idea of the sort of averages of what a competitive team does in each category, of what sort of scoring is. And it depends on your league size. You want about 1.2 threes a game average over your whole team, about 0.8 blocks, about 1 steal, 3.5 to 4 assists, 5.5 to 6 rebounds, 48 and 78%. Points at about 14.5 to 15. So if you can get those sort of numbers, they're the sort of numbers you should be targeting. So you should be looking at these guys. What are their projections? What did they do last time? And have like a running tally. Have like a notepad next to you. Okay, so Melo's going to get me 27 points. That puts me 12 points over the average of 15. So then if I get Rudy Gobert with the next pick and he's a 10-point guy, that puts us at 37. And then we're at average of 18 points. I'm still sitting pretty well. I just can't afford to get too many low guys. Then I need to get another guy who's like an 18 or 19-point scorer in round 3 to keep it bumped up. But if you went Melo and Harden early on, we're talking about 54 points between the 2 of them. So we're at 27. We're well above that 15 average. So then you can judge it that way. Just sort of, you can have your own spreadsheet with these numbers in, and just you're looking at targets of where you want to be in those categories and which categories you want to be strong in. But I think that's a pretty standard baseline for a 12-team league.
Yeah, so you've got some benchmarks. That's really good. All right, I'm ready to go on to a different question if you're okay with that.
I am okay.
All right, so from Jeff, he's got a question. He's basically asking about strategy for auction drafts. We know that in a snake draft, you basically get to pick 1 player in each round. Your team is compared to an auction, it's very uniform. You've kind of got 1 very good player, and a 2nd-round player, a 3rd-round player. But in an auction draft, you can draft 3 first-round level players and then a bunch of last-round type players, or you can pick mostly 3rd-round picks. You can skip grabbing that 1st-round guy and that 2nd-round guy and pick all 3rd-round guys and sort of have we always hear this stars and scrubs versus a balanced team. And basically his point is, I'm not going to read the whole emails, but he's basically saying stars seem to not go at a very good rate in his experience in auction drafts. So does that make you, first of all, do you have that experience in your auction drafts? And if so, um, does that make you avoid those stars, or do you still feel like it's worth picking them?
Okay, so I read an article on this during the week about auction strategy, and the way that I look at it, if you're in an 8-team league, then stars and scrubs is a very viable solution. The deeper your league gets, the less ideal it becomes. When you get past 12-team leagues, I would not be recommending to go with the stars and scrubs type mentality, because that is my experience as well, that the stars will often get bid on higher than what their value is. Now, this season, the numbers that are coming through on ESPN and Yahoo with their projected numbers, which influences so much behavior in the draft rooms, are actually not too bad. You'll still see people going above them. And it might not necessarily be the top guy. So I've actually, in auctions, I've actually been getting guys like Harden and Curry because I think there's still value. It's more the mid guys, like the pick 4 to 10 in a snake draft sort of players. A lot of them are tending to go $10, $20 too high. And I'm big on going with a more balanced approach in an auction for a couple of reasons. I think you can get yourself significant
standard leagues right now, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Standard. So in a 10 or a 12-team league, as much as stars and scrubs is a thing and it can work, you need to be careful, because if you spend $100 or $90 on Anthony Davis and he gets injured, forget about it, because then you're pairing Anthony Davis with, you don't have a second round guy, probably you might not have a third round guy. You think to a snake draft, you've got Anthony Davis and then you've got 4 ninth round guys. And no offense to ninth round players, they're not carrying your team if Davis goes down. And that's great that you've spent the money. Look at this, I've got to start. I'm going to cycle through waiver wire guys. Well, you can keep cycling through waiver wire guys. But if Anthony Davis is sitting on the bench, you can cycle through as many waiver wire guys as you want. It's not going to do anything. So I tend to go, there will be some undervalued of those top players. There's always one, and there's no way of knowing who it's going to be. You just have to say, okay, if someone gets undervalued at the start with those big names going off the board, you can grab them. But I wouldn't be paying anywhere. I wouldn't be paying big money on those guys, because I don't want to handcuff my team to one player. I would rather, like I had a 10-team auction league draft last season. My best player was Paul Millsap, and the rest of my team was all mid-range guys who were all priced or snake draft value between about 20 and 70, and just had just great mid-round value on all these players and got them all at really cheap prices. And that's the way that I tend to approach it, because I don't want to put all my eggs necessarily in one basket, which is what you can be doing if you're throwing $100 on Anthony Davis.
Yeah. Can I give you my counter argument?
Go ahead.
So I do like the stars and scrubs approach in a standard league, but I think what you said was key. Is you've got to pick the best of the best guys. Like, you can't say I'm going to go to stars and scrubs approach and pick and pay and overpay for Paul George.
No, that's
fantastic. Like, I like watching him. If you're going to go stars and scrubs, you pick, like, I don't even mind picking 2 of the top 3 or 4 players, and you spend 60 or 70% of your budget on those 2. But don't do it with the guys that usually go picks 8 through 15. Do it with the guys that go picks 1 through 4 or 1 through 5. And then I think the reason you do that is because they are, first of all, people just avoid bidding at some point. Like, they're not willing to kind of go that high. They're not that confident in the player. So there is sort of a cap, I feel like, in the draft. And the other thing is, those are the guys that you know for sure are going to be great. And this is your only chance in the season to get them. Nobody's trading you Anthony Davis in the middle of the season. At least that's my experience. Those guys, Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant, when he was healthy, Steph Curry, they don't get traded. People have built their team around them. So if you want those guys, like, the auction is the only means of grabbing those players. And then my theory is I can have 2 or 3 of those cornerstones, and I can just fill in guys that, the Zach LaVines, the guys that last year, for example, I did that, and I ended up picking Draymond Green up. I picked up Rudy Gobert. I picked up Giannis. I picked up a few guys like that, and I was able to kind of cobble a decent bench team together to go along with the big guys that I drafted.
That's definitely the key point that you made there, is that you don't want to overpay for these mid guys. So guys like John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Kawhi Leonard, Klay Thompson, they're all going for way too much. Based on the average prices, when you can go down and look at a guy like Gordon Hayward, who's only been projected or only average auction price on Yahoo at $21. Like that's a bargain. Like Reggie Jackson's average auction price is $6. It's $14 on ESPN. Like that's like where you get great value because they're $25, $30 players that you can get at those cheaper prices. And there's a ton of those guys through the mid range. I already mentioned Ricky Rubio, Tariq Evans, Derek Favors, Chris Bosh, like all these guys, and going at significantly less. Whereas guys at the top like Cousins, Wall, Leonard, Westbrook, LeBron, they're all going for like LeBron's average price is $76. Like I don't want to spend $76 on LeBron James. Steph Curry's going at 82. You know what? I can get behind Steph Curry at 82 but I'm not getting behind LeBron at 76. I'm not getting behind Westbrook at 68 or Cousins at 63. I want to get Reggie Jackson for $9. I want to get Gordon Hayward for 20. I want to get Nick Batum at 12. Like these are all value players, and you can have Nick Batum at $12, Reggie Jackson at $6, which gives us $18. Then you can add Derek Favors in at 17, gives you $35, and you've got Favors, Batum, and Hayward for $35 for half of LeBron. And then you could theoretically add that to Curry, who is a value player, and you've got four top 30 players.
Yeah,
there's significant value, and you're also a little bit insulated against an injury to one of them. Whereas if you go, I'm grabbing Curry, then I'm grabbing LeBron, well, you're in a lot of trouble if one of them goes down.
Yeah, and just to add to this, I've got another question from Michael, who's basically he's asking if you go into the draft planning to pick a player, and I'm kind of reading between the lines here, but it sounds like maybe planning to pick one of those guys in a first rounder, for example, and everybody in your league is overbidding on the top guys. Do you think it's a better idea to just abandon your strategy and hope to pick up value later in the draft, or to bid higher than you plan to?
Okay, that's a good question. There's clearly two ways to go about this. What I like to do in an auction draft, $200 budget, right? So I'll have a big 200 written on a piece of paper, and I'll have all the guys and the prices I think they're worth. And maybe if it's the first guy, then he goes $5 over, and I really want to have him, and I still think that's $5 over is not too bad. But then I want to make sure that the guys I'm getting next, I'm getting it at less than $5 below their value. So then I really want to make sure I'm targeting these guys who are significantly underpriced in leagues, like a Ricky Rubio who's going at $7. Like I want to make sure that I get him, and then that puts me back into a positive plus minus in terms of money that I've spent. But if you find that everyone is going $10, $15 over, I would let those guys go at $10, $15 over. I wouldn't be going and spending an extra $10 or $15 over, because then in that case, there's a massive chance that then you can load up, and you could legitimately have a chance at filling your team with 10 players ranked between 20 and 50. And you will destroy other teams. I don't care if the other teams have got Davis and your best, if your best player is Nick Vucevic, which it could be in that case, but then your worst player is Greg Monroe, you'll kill them. You will absolutely destroy them. And you have to look, and that's a great point. You really need to pay attention to what is happening, because if everyone is just throwing cash like crazy. The other thing is that if someone appears to be a value and everyone else has got a max bid of $7, you can end up actually just outbidding every player that you want that fits exactly what you want to do. You never want to be left with cash on the board.
No.
So that's another
actually
thing.
My worry if you don't overbid on somebody. If you go in and say, I'm going to pick Kevin Durant, and I'll go up to $85, and Kevin Durant goes at 86, and so you don't bid a couple more times, you better have
$2, $3 is fine.
No, and that's not really the point. My point is just to say, if you've earmarked $80 for Kevin Durant, and now there's no Kevin Durant on your team, you better know how to you better be prepared to spend that $80 somewhere, because you don't want to finish the draft and have 40 extra bucks and be like, well, I could have gotten an extra $5 or $10 on Kevin Durant, and now I'm never going to have him on my team. But actually, again, just for those very elite guys, those first 3 or 4 guys, I'm willing to
4 guys.
overbid for, 4 or 5, 10, $10 if I need to. Sometimes if I plan to grab those guys to make sure they're on my team, that I the team I've planned to build for, I'm going to be able to have them as my cornerstone again, because I don't want to get stuck with having to decide on a mid-round guy. Not a mid-round guy, but like a late first, second round guy to be the cornerstone of my team. So I guess that's just another perspective on it.
The other thing that I think that is important, and the idea has just completely slipped my mind. Oh no, this is what I wanted to say. When I do auction drafts, what I find will often happen is the first 20 players or so might go off, the first 10 players, and I don't end up bidding or getting any of them. Maybe I'll get one out of the first 20 players, and people go, "Oh, yeah, Josh is not bidding." But then by the time 60 players have gone off, 70 players have gone off the board, I'm done, and I go, "I'll catch you guys later. My team's full because I've had this money." And instead of me leaving it around, I might have gotten 6 $30 players, or I might have gotten 5 $30 players and another couple of $10 players, and built my team that way, and got $10, $20 value on these guys. And this is the way that I sort of look at it as well, Mark. You've got your projected auction values on your site. Is that with a $200 budget, I want my team to sort of return about $270 worth of value, $250 to $270. And I think if you do that, you're in a real strength position. So I wanted to try and get that value. If you spend $200 and you get $200 worth of value, I don't think you're going to win.
No, that's fair. All right, I've got a couple of kind of quick hitters for you here. A couple other questions. So one question came from Aaron Thompson. He is trying to select some keepers, and I think he's taking the first initial approach, which is to find some auction values and to compare them to what his keeper value will be. For an auction keeper, you don't necessarily want to always just keep the best player on your team. Like if you spent $100 for Durant and he's only worth 70, even though he's the best player on your team, you're not getting value there. So he's gone through, he's identified who are his value players, and he's compared them to, he can kind of see the difference between what we project for the auction value and what he can keep them at. But he's asking a couple of good questions here beyond that, and basically saying, how much do you factor in not only how much I think that they're worth, but how much they're going to go in the draft? Like if you say, for example, one of the players he's talking about is Gordon Hayward, and he's saying I can keep him for 20. Maybe he thinks he's worth 40, but he's thinking that nobody else in his draft is going to go over 30 for him. So even though he calculates as like a really valuable keeper, he doesn't necessarily think his league will reflect that. Like when you're thinking about keepers and things like that, how do you take that into account, or do you take into account how much the league is going to, like how your league actions are going to bid? So, excuse me, how your league mates are going to bid into your keeper decisions.
You do have to take that into consideration. It's hard to be accurate with that though, because you don't know exactly. And the other thing is with keepers is everybody's prices will get inflated, most likely, because
really
there might be.
Can you explain that? I think that's a key here.
Because the reason is that there's less good players around. And so the people might have money, and some people might have less money, but in general, you will find a lot of cases where the players go for more because there's people want to get these players. They don't want to spend it on. The easiest
way to think about it is pretend at the very beginning of your draft, not as a keeper, but just at the beginning, Anthony Davis went for $50 less than he's worth. Then you're basically saying there's an extra $50 on the table, and so everybody's price should go up because there's more money than there. That's exactly what a keeper is. You've taken players off the board at a cheaper price than they're worth, and so everybody else is, assuming everybody spends all their money, the rest of the players should be inflated. So it's not exactly wise to just say, here's the player's auction value, what it should be, and what their keeper value is, because you need to take into account keeper inflation when you're looking at that. And what that sounds complicated and sounds like you need to go to economics class to do that. You don't really need to. What that basically just says is if you're deciding between a high-ranked player who maybe you say has $10 of keeper value or a low-ranked, go with the high-ranked guy because those extra dollars are going to probably push his value up.
Yep, you're not going to get him back at that price.
Yeah, you're not. It's not actually $10 because if you threw him back in the pool, maybe he would go for 15 or 20 more than what you could keep him at because of that inflation. So just kind of tie goes to the higher ranked player.
You're going to see that happen a lot in keeper leagues this year with Rudy Gobert, where people would have kept him for $1, and his value is maybe $30. It might be 24, 35, whatever sort of amount it is. That's $30 of value that someone's got. So they've got a player that's worth $30 on their team, but now there's an extra $30 sort of around to be spent, and it's going to go to one of these higher players. And if for some reason someone might have spent $100 on Kevin Durant last season before his injury and go, oh no, I can't justify $100 on Kevin Durant this year. That you throw Kevin Durant back out there, and he might be valued at $65, but there's extra money out there, so someone might go and put $85 on him. And because they've got extra money, because they go, I kept Gobert at $1, I've got this extra money I can play around with. Gobert is a $40 player. I've got him for $1. Look at this extra money I can spend on getting another player. So those high rank guys will go for more in most sort of keeper situations, I think.
Yep. All right, Josh, I had some more emails that I wanted to get through, but I don't think we're going to get through them in one time. Maybe we'll have to invite you back one of these days and we can go through the rest of the questions.
Sounds good.
I don't want to take too much of your day up, and I know you got things to do here, so we'll wrap up here. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Daily Fantasy Basketball Podcast. We appreciate you checking out our site and hanging out with us. We're always wanting to answer your questions and give you custom ranks if we can.
When Josh, some idiot goes out there and does a league, including no standard categories, and then you get bombarded with, can you give me ranks for assist to turnover ratio?
I'm actually disappointed. I was planning to send those ranks out tonight, and it sounds like the draft's already happened. So
the draft happened this morning. I'll tell you the categories that we had. I've got them in front of me now. Offensive rebounds, field goals made, personal fouls, free throws made, assist to turnover ratio, 3-point percentage, adjusted field goal percentage, steals to turnover ratio, and points per 48 minutes.
Yeah, the points per minute was the one that was causing me problems.
Points per minute.
Yeah, I'm sorry to whoever in your league asked me for those rankings. I didn't get them to you in time. I didn't realize the time limit. If you are under a strict time limit for your custom ranks, that's fine. I'll put you at the top of the order that I'm doing them in. Just let me know. I hate to miss your draft if I can help it. So send those on. Keep supporting the Daily Fantasy Basketball Podcast. And Josh, why don't you tell everybody once again where they can find you if they want to talk to you?
You can find me, first of all, you can find me on Twitter for 140 characters of responses, which is redrock_bball. You can also sign up to allstar5.com, Mark, which is something that you're involved with me as well, where we can answer things in a more long form sense in terms of questions. So go and check out allstar5.com. My podcast, which is the Red Rock Fantasy Basketball Podcast, can be found anywhere that this beautiful podcast is found. So when you type in fantasy basketball at Stitcher or iTunes, you'll see Mark and Kyle's beautiful logo come up. You'll see mine come up. So head across to both of them and subscribe and review and rate and all that sort of lovely stuff. And on Basketball Monster, I'm doing a lot of stuff over there as well. So make sure you check that out. I'll have hopefully a couple of articles coming out this weekend. I'm actually researching an interesting daily fantasy topic at the moment. I don't know if it's going to come to fruition, but if it does, it's going to be interesting.
All right. There you go. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you again. Hopefully it will be Kyle's beautiful voice that you hear next time we post a podcast.
I'm sure he'll be back better than ever.
We're glad. Josh, thanks again for coming. We appreciate you.
No problem.
Your contribution here. You're always welcome on the Daily Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Anytime you want to join us.
I will take you up on that offer very often, and you'll get inundated with my voice and bad humor.
Sounds good. All right, guys. We'll see you later. Bye.
See ya.